He lived in a quiet neighborhood, a place where everyone knew each other but kept to their own lives. People who passed by his house often saw him tending his small garden or walking along the sidewalk with his dog. The dog was a large, strong animal with a golden brown coat and eyes that seemed to understand everything around it. It was not just a pet, it was a companion, a friend and a constant presence that filled the empty spaces in his life. Despite his quiet demeanor, there was a certain discipline in the way he moved, the way he observed everything around him. It was subtle, but anyone paying attention might notice the precision in his steps, the careful way he handled his surroundings. Mornings usually began early for him. He woke up before the sun, the quiet of the neighborhood barely disturbed except for birds and the occasional distant hum of a car. He would brew a cup of coffee, black, and sit on his porch for a few moments just watching. His dog would sit beside him, tail gently wagging, leaning its head on his knee for comfort. They shared a routine that had formed over years, a silent understanding. His neighbors often saw them together and thought of it as a peaceful start to the day, never imagining that behind his calm eyes, there was a mind trained to react with deadly precision in situations that no ordinary person could handle. Evenings were spent in similar quiet. He would take his dog for long walks around the neighborhood, sometimes heading to the small park a few blocks away. Children would wave, people would nod hello, and he would return their gestures with a polite smile. He avoided unnecessary conversations, preferring to keep his private life exactly that, private. Yet anyone observing closely might notice the way he scanned his surroundings, how he moved in a way that seemed careful, deliberate, almost like he was always calculating. It was a habit, something ingrained deep within him, a remnant from a life that few knew existed. He had not always lived like this. There were times in his past filled with chaos and danger, moments where life and death hung by a thread, where a single decision could change everything. But now those days were behind him, or so he told himself. He had left that world for good, choosing to blend in, to create a life where no one would suspect the true extent of his abilities. And yet, even in this quiet life, there were traces of his former self, hidden beneath layers of ordinary routines. His dog had been with him for several years, a rescue that had come into his life at a time when he needed companionship more than anything else. From the moment they met, there was a bond that formed instantly. The dog sensed the quiet strength in him, the discipline and the calm control. And he in turn found comfort in the dog's presence, a loyal creature who required love and care but gave back unconditional affection. Together they formed a small world of their own, one where neither felt alone. People in the neighborhood saw him as just another man living a quiet life, perhaps a little different, a little reserved but harmless and kind. They didn't know about the countless nights he had spent in foreign lands, in situations that tested the limits of human endurance. They didn't know about the lives he had saved, the operations he had led, or the moments when his skills had made the difference between life and death. None of that mattered now. What mattered was the present, the life he had built for himself and his dog, a life that was simple, predictable, and safe. One morning, the routine started as usual. The sun had barely risen when he stepped onto the porch, the air crisp and filled with the scent of dew-soaked grass. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the railing, the dog sitting quietly at his feet. He watched the world wake up slowly, listening to the faint sounds of the neighborhood stirring to life. The world was calm, and for a moment he allowed himself to breathe fully, to enjoy the simplicity that had become a rare treasure in his life. As he finished his coffee, he felt the familiar nudge of his dog, urging him to start the morning walk. He smiled, reached down, and patted its head before grabbing the leash. Together they moved down the sidewalk, the dog trotting beside him with energy and curiosity. The streets were empty at this early hour, the occasional car passing by without disturbing the serenity. It was during these walks that he felt most connected to the world, most at peace. A rare sense of normalcy that he cherished deeply. Despite the calm, there was always an underlying awareness, a vigilance that never left him. He noticed everything, the way a car slowed at a corner, the patterns of people walking their own pets, the subtle changes in the environment. It was instinctive, automatic, a part of him that he could not leave behind. He had learned long ago that being alert, even in ordinary situations, could make all the difference. It was not fear. It was preparation, a habit carried from a life where mistakes could be fatal. The dog, sensing his alertness, stayed close, moving with a quiet precision of its own. There was an understanding between them, a communication that went beyond words. The dog had grown to recognize his moods, his energy, and his subtle signals. In return, he had trained it gently but firmly, reinforcing commands, encouraging trust and obedience. They were a team, partners in a quiet but disciplined world of their own. Days passed with this rhythm. He maintained his garden meticulously, watered plants with care, and watched them grow as if nurturing life itself gave him a sense of balance. Neighbors occasionally stopped to chat about the weather or local news, and he responded with polite interest, never revealing more than necessary. The dog would sit or lie nearby, eyes following every movement, ears perked for any sign of danger or unusual activity. This combination of ordinary routines and constant awareness defined his life. Though outwardly calm, he sometimes allowed his mind to wander to memories of the past. He remembered distant lands, the sounds of unfamiliar cities, the tense moments before critical operations, the trust placed in him by those who depended on his leadership. He reflected on the skills he had honed, the discipline required to survive, and the lessons learned from both triumphs and losses. These memories were never a source of pride, but a reminder of responsibility and the value of life. They shaped him, silently influencing every decision he made, even in the most mundane activities. Evenings brought a different pace. He would often sit on his porch again, this time watching the sun dip below the horizon. The dog would lie beside him, resting its head on his lap, content and trusting. Sometimes he would walk a little longer, letting the dog explore areas of the park, watching it run and play. Laughter of children or distant conversations of neighbors provided a comforting soundtrack, a sense of belonging that he had chosen to embrace. These moments, simple as they were, felt precious because they were fleeting. He had few friends, no close relatives nearby, but he had built a life that felt complete in its quiet way. His satisfaction came from simple achievements: a well-tended garden, a loyal companion, a peaceful neighborhood. He had traded the chaos of his past for the serenity of routine, finding meaning in small acts of care, discipline, and responsibility. It was a life far removed from danger, yet one that required a different kind of strength, a strength of patience, consistency, and emotional control. On some nights, he would lie awake, the dog curled up beside him, reflecting on the unusual balance of his existence. He had lived through experiences most could not imagine, yet now he found solace in the most ordinary aspects of life. Each morning, each walk, each quiet moment on the porch reinforced a sense of gratitude for the life he had built. The dog, unaware of the complexities of its owner's past, offered pure, unjudged companionship. It was a partnership that healed the unseen scars he carried, a daily reminder of loyalty and love in its simplest form. Despite his contentment, there was an unspoken understanding between him and his dog about vigilance and awareness. He could not completely let go of the instincts that had kept him alive. Every rustle of leaves, every unfamiliar sound, and every movement in the neighborhood was noted, processed, and filed away in the back of his mind. It was a mental habit formed over years of survival and leadership, now quietly woven into the fabric of a life that seemed ordinary on the surface. This careful balance of simplicity and vigilance became the foundation of his days. The world saw a man walking with his dog, tending a garden, living quietly. But beneath the surface there was a mind sharp and alert, a body disciplined, and a heart quietly resilient. The dog was both a companion and a mirror, reflecting back a life of loyalty, trust, and quiet strength. Together they moved through the rhythm of each day, forming a bond that was deep, steady, and unspoken, a small but significant universe in a world that had once been chaotic and dangerous. He cherished these ordinary moments more than he could have imagined when his past was filled with extraordinary events. The quiet life was not a punishment or a retreat, but a deliberate choice, a sanctuary where he could heal, observe, and live with purpose, albeit in a different way. The dog, ever loyal, was central to this life, a companion that reminded him daily of the simple joys, the silent triumphs, and the ongoing journey of balance between strength and gentleness. And so his days continued in this delicate harmony. Mornings began with coffee and quiet observation, walks brought both exercise and connection, evenings offered reflection and calm, and nights were spent in companionship and rest. Life was simple, but it was rich in ways that mattered most to him. The dog, always close, remained the heart of this world, offering warmth and loyalty without question. And in this peaceful existence, he found the quiet satisfaction of living a life defined not by past glories, but by present care, discipline, and a bond that nothing could break. The morning started like any other. He woke up early, the sun barely touching the horizon. The air was crisp and quiet, carrying the smell of damp earth from overnight dew. He poured his coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, and sat on the porch with his dog by his side. They shared a peaceful silence, a routine that had become a comforting rhythm in his life. Today, though, there was a subtle tension in the air, an unease he could not immediately place. The dog seemed to sense it too, its ears twitching at distant sounds, its eyes alert and focused. After finishing his coffee, he grabbed the leash and the two of them stepped onto the sidewalk. The dog walked close, its movements precise and controlled, reflecting the training and bond they shared. The streets were empty at this early hour, but he noticed small details. The way a neighbor left their trash can slightly ajar, the distant hum of a car engine, and the subtle shift in the wind carrying voices from down the street. He trusted his instincts, a habit ingrained over years of discipline and vigilance. It had kept him alive before, and he knew it still mattered. As they neared the small park a few blocks away, he noticed a group of law enforcement officers speaking quietly near the entrance. They seemed to be responding to a call, though he could not yet tell what it was about. Normally, he would walk a different path to avoid unnecessary interaction, but today, the park was the usual route, and he did not want to disturb the dog's routine. He slowed his pace, allowing the dog to sniff the grass along the sidewalk, all the while observing the officers from a safe distance. He noticed how tense they appeared, the way their hands hovered near their equipment and the rapid exchange of low words. Something felt off. He tightened his grip on the leash, the dog immediately sensing his heightened alertness. Together they moved cautiously, keeping a safe distance but aware that any sudden movement could draw attention. He had learned long ago that even the smallest misunderstanding could escalate quickly, and he applied that lesson now, silently calculating the safest course of action. As they approached, one of the officers spotted them. A quick glance, a moment of recognition, and then a raised voice warning them to stop. He paused, raising his free hand to signal compliance. The dog, sensing the tension, stood still, ears pointed forward, muscles taut, ready for guidance. He spoke softly to the dog, urging calm, and took a step backward to show no threat. But the officers were already on edge, eyes scanning every movement, hands gripping batons and firearms. A child's laughter echoed from nearby, breaking the tension slightly, but it was not enough to ease the officer's nerves. He tried again to communicate with words and gestures, but the situation escalated faster than anyone could anticipate. One officer stepped forward, signaling the dog as if it were a threat. The dog barked once, startled by the sudden movement, and that was all it took. A moment later, chaos erupted. Commands were shouted, and in a split second the dog was struck. He felt his stomach drop, a sharp, horrifying realization settling in. The dog fell to the ground, yelping, and he rushed forward, calling its name, kneeling beside it in disbelief. The officers froze for a moment, their training and caution clashing with the visible bond between man and animal. He stayed calm externally, though inside a storm of grief, anger, and disbelief roared. He tried to shield the dog, whispering comforting words, but it was clear the wound was serious. He looked up at the officers, his eyes steady, searching for reason, explanation, or remorse, but found only procedural caution and nervousness. Neighbors began to appear, drawn by the commotion, voices rising in concern and confusion. Some shouted at the officers, asking why they had done this, while others knelt beside him, offering support and apologies for what had happened. He appreciated their concern, but was too focused on the dog to respond fully. His mind raced, processing every detail, the timing, the movements, the reactions. Every instinct honed over years whispered that he had been too late to prevent this tragedy. Yet every ounce of control in him urged patience. The dog whimpered softly, its body trembling, and he held it close, careful to comfort without causing additional pain. He could feel the warmth fading, the life slipping from a companion who had been loyal and steadfast through every quiet day and gentle evening. He whispered apologies repeatedly, a soft mantra of grief and sorrow. Around him, The world seemed to blur, neighbors' faces merging with flashing lights and the distant hum of approaching emergency vehicles. The incident had turned the neighborhood into a stage of chaos and heartbreak, yet he remained centered, anchored by the love for his companion. As paramedics arrived, he allowed them to take over, stepping back but never leaving the dog's side. He observed every movement, every measure they took, his analytical mind assessing what could be done, how quickly, and whether there was still hope. Despite the professionalism of the emergency responders, he knew the injuries were too severe. The dog's breathing was shallow, eyes closing intermittently, and a deep sense of helplessness settled over him. Years of training had prepared him for life-and-death scenarios, but nothing could prepare a man for the sudden loss of a loyal friend who depended on him entirely. He tried to speak to the officers, to understand why things had escalated so quickly. Their explanations were procedural, lacking empathy, a series of standard responses that only deepened the wound. He listened without interrupting, keeping his anger restrained, though it burned like fire beneath the surface. His military past had taught him control, and he exercised it now even as the grief threatened to overwhelm every rational thought. He knew that losing control would serve no purpose, that the path forward required clarity, not impulsive reaction. The neighbors, sensing the depth of his pain, began to disperse slowly, some offering words of comfort, others retreating to give space. The park, once a place of calm and routine, was now filled with a strange tension, a reminder that even ordinary life could be disrupted in an instant. He remained kneeling beside the dog, holding it gently, whispering its name, and silently mourning a life that had been more than just a pet, but a loyal companion, a constant presence, and a source of daily joy. Hours seemed to pass in a blur. The dog's passing left an emptiness that words could not capture. He stayed with it until the paramedics had no choice but to remove the body respectfully. Even then he lingered, ensuring every detail was attended to, that the dignity of his companion was preserved. He walked back home slowly, leash dragging at his side, mind replaying the incident over and over, examining each step, each decision, and each moment that had led to this tragedy. The quiet neighborhood, once comforting, now seemed heavy and oppressive, filled with the echoes of grief. Inside his home, he sat in silence, staring at the empty space where the dog had once slept. The weight of loss pressed down on him, and for the first time in years he allowed himself to feel completely unguarded. Tears came unbidden, not just for the loss of the dog, but for the injustice of the situation, the misunderstanding, and the preventable tragedy. Memories of their shared routines, morning walks, quiet evenings on the porch, and playful moments in the yard flooded his mind. Each memory was a sharp contrast to the reality he now faced. He thought back to the past, to times when life had demanded every ounce of his attention and skill. Then survival depended on calculated action, on leadership, and on trust. Now survival had no meaning. He could not fight the death of his companion, could not undo the decisions made in a split second. The helplessness was overwhelming, yet he forced himself to breathe, to process, to maintain the discipline that had always defined him. He could not allow grief to turn into reckless anger. No matter how much the instinct called for it, neighbors continued to check in, bringing food, offering words of sympathy, but he remained mostly silent, listening politely, acknowledging their kindness with nods and faint smiles. The world moved on outside, children played, cars passed, and life continued as if nothing had happened. Yet inside everything had changed. A routine day had transformed into an unimaginable loss, one that would shape his thoughts and emotions for a long time. The familiar streets, the quiet walks, and the comforting routines had been disrupted, leaving a raw wound that no passage of time could immediately heal. He spent the evening in reflection, thinking about what had occurred and what it meant. The tragedy was not just about the loss of the dog, but also about the fragility of ordinary life. Even in a quiet neighborhood, even when following every precaution, danger could appear in the most unexpected forms. His mind, trained to anticipate, assess, and react, replayed every detail, every movement, every choice, analyzing what could have been done differently, even though the outcome was inevitable once events had escalated. The discipline of his past now became a tool for understanding, a way to channel grief into clarity rather than chaos. Night fell, and with it, a heavy silence settled over his home. He sat in the darkness, the absence of his companion keenly felt. Sleep was elusive, for the mind would not rest while grief demanded attention. He thought of all the mornings they had shared, all the walks, all the quiet moments, and all the small joys that had made life feel meaningful. He allowed himself to mourn fully, to acknowledge the depth of the loss, knowing that in doing so, he was honoring the bond they had shared. This was not weakness, he reminded himself. It was human, it was necessary, and it was a step toward healing. He knew that the coming days would be difficult. He would have to face the officers, the procedures, and the realities of what had happened. But he also knew that acting rashly would not restore what had been lost. He needed patience, strategy, and resolve, the very qualities that had allowed him to survive in far more dangerous circumstances. This was his new battlefield, one of grief and justice, where strength would be measured not in combat skill but in endurance, control, and clarity of purpose. As the night deepened, he finally rested, the weight of the day pressing down but not breaking him. The absence of his dog was a void that could not be filled, yet he carried the lessons of love, loyalty, and companionship that had defined their time together. In the quiet of his home, he allowed a small, silent promise to form, that he would honor the life lost, that he would find a way to channel this grief into meaningful action, and that he would never forget the bond that had shaped so many ordinary days into moments of extraordinary connection. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring challenges, but for tonight, he simply remembered, mourned, and felt the profound emptiness left behind by a loyal companion whose presence had been a constant light in his quiet world. The day after the tragedy, he woke up with a heavy heart. The sunlight seemed harsher, the air colder, and the silence of his home more deafening. The absence of his companion was painfully clear. Every corner reminded him of moments shared. The dog's leash hung neatly by the door, the bed lay empty, and the food bowls sat untouched. The familiar routines of life had turned into reminders of loss, and each movement in the house felt hollow without the comforting presence of the dog. He sat quietly, coffee in hand, staring out at the empty street, thoughts running deeper than he had allowed himself before. Grief was present, but alongside it, something else stirred. Memories of his past, long buried under years of quiet living, began to surface. He remembered distant lands, harsh environments, and missions where every decision had meant life or death. His mind went back to nights spent planning operations, coordinating teams, and leading others in situations that required exact timing and flawless execution. He remembered the pressure, the trust others had placed in him, and the instinctive clarity that had guided his actions. These were memories he had tried to leave behind, yet now, grief had a way of pulling them forward, blending the ordinary pain with the extraordinary experiences that had shaped him. Sitting in his living room, he allowed himself to reflect deeply. He remembered the intensity of the missions, the reliance on precision and discipline, and the responsibility of keeping lives safe. Every thought of his past was accompanied by a sense of both pride and humility. The skills that had once been vital in survival were still a part of him, ready to be drawn upon if needed. But they were not to be used recklessly. The world had changed, and he had chosen a life where such skills were rarely necessary, yet the loss of his companion had stirred instincts that he could not ignore, reminding him that vigilance, strategy, and careful planning were never out of place. He walked around his home slowly, touching objects that reminded him of daily life, grounding himself in the present even as the past pressed into his consciousness. Each memory of the dog's loyalty was accompanied by memories of leadership, courage, and discipline. The bond he had shared with his companion mirrored in some ways the trust placed in him by those who depended on him during missions. The dog had relied on him completely, just as soldiers had, and now that trust had been violated in a moment of chaos. He recognized the depth of his grief not just as loss, but as a violation of responsibility he felt toward a life that had depended on him. Outside, the neighborhood carried on in oblivion to his inner turmoil. Children played, neighbors walked their own pets, and cars passed down streets that now felt strange and distant. He stepped outside, moving slowly, observing without engaging immediately. The dog had always been a bridge to this world, and without it he felt slightly disconnected, as though the ordinary connections he had relied upon were blurred. Yet as he walked, memories of past discipline guided his steps. He observed patterns, noted details, and allowed his mind to assess potential risks without letting anxiety take hold. This was his way of coping, merging grief with the practiced vigilance of a trained mind. In his mind, he began replaying the events leading up to the tragedy. Every detail mattered: the officer's positioning, the dog's reaction, his own movements, and the timing of each action. He did not do this out of obsession, but to understand fully, to learn and to plan what needed to happen next. Grief had sharpened his focus rather than dulling it. He realized that while he could not change the past, he could influence the future, ensuring that no similar tragedy would happen again to anyone or any animal. The desire for justice, tempered by discipline, began to grow quietly alongside his sorrow. He started making notes in a journal he had kept for years, a private place where thoughts were analyzed, strategies formed, and memories recorded. He wrote down what had happened, how it had unfolded, and the details of the environment, timing, and responses. Each entry was meticulous, reflecting the analytical approach he had used in his past missions. Even in grief, there was clarity. Each note helped him channel the emotions that threatened to overwhelm him, turning raw pain into structured reflection. He allowed himself to consider options, potential actions, and ways to address the situation without resorting to uncontrolled anger. As the day moved forward, he found himself looking at photographs of the dog, small moments captured in time that brought both comfort and pain. He remembered walks through the park, playful moments in the yard, quiet evenings on the porch, and the simple joy of companionship. The memories were vivid, almost tactile, and they reminded him of why he had chosen to build a quiet life. His grief was profound, yet it was also a reminder of love, loyalty, and the deep connections that defined a meaningful existence. These reflections fueled a quiet determination that he needed to act thoughtfully, not impulsively. He realized that the incident had exposed the fragility of his carefully constructed life, and yet it also reminded him of the strength within. He had survived unimaginable challenges before, guided by skill, patience, and careful planning. Those skills were still a part of him, dormant perhaps, but ready if needed. He began considering how to use that expertise to navigate the aftermath, to interact with authorities, and to ensure accountability without losing control. Every decision was weighed carefully, every option analyzed from multiple perspectives, just as he had done countless times in his past life. He started preparing for the steps ahead. He researched legal procedures, reviewed potential channels for accountability, and documented everything that might be relevant. While his instinct might have been to act immediately, he chose patience and strategy. This was not a battlefield of physical combat, but it required similar qualities: observation, timing, and careful execution. He approached it as he would any mission, understanding the environment, assessing risks, and planning the most effective path forward. Even as he prepared, he allowed moments of reflection and sorrow. He did not deny the depth of his emotions. Instead, he let them inform his actions, providing motivation without clouding judgment. He understood that grief and determination could coexist, that one could channel emotion into purpose rather than letting it consume. The loss of his companion had opened a wound, but it also revealed the enduring strength within him, the resilience that had carried him through life-threatening missions, now ready to guide him in this quieter, yet profoundly important struggle. In the evenings, he took solitary walks, allowing the memories to surface while observing the world around him. Every detail, the movement of leaves, distant voices, the hum of vehicles, was noted subconsciously, a reflection of his trained mind. The world was ordinary, yet his perception of it was heightened by the awareness that danger and injustice could appear even in mundane moments. He had learned to remain calm, to observe, and to react with precision. These skills, long thought to be behind him, were now tools for navigating grief and seeking resolution. He began speaking quietly to himself, not out loud but in thought, rehearsing interactions he might have with authorities, imagining conversations, anticipating reactions, and preparing responses. Every possible scenario was analyzed. He was not seeking confrontation. He sought understanding and accountability. His past had taught him that patience, clarity, and measured action often produced results far more effective than impulsive responses. The principles that had guided him in combat now guided him in a battle of emotions, procedure, and justice. The nights were long, and sleep was often elusive. He lay awake thinking about the bond he had shared with his dog, reflecting on the loyalty, trust, and companionship that had defined their time together. He felt a mixture of sorrow, gratitude, and determination. The grief was raw, but it was accompanied by a quiet understanding of his own strength, the discipline that had been instilled through years of training, and the responsibility he felt to act wisely. He allowed himself to feel the full weight of loss while also recognizing the need to maintain control. Days turned into a week, and slowly, he began taking measured steps. He contacted local authorities to understand the incident fully, remaining composed and clear in his communication. He documented interactions carefully, noting inconsistencies and preparing for the next stage. His approach was systematic, blending emotional insight with strategic thinking. The instincts honed in far more dangerous circumstances were now guiding him in a world that demanded patience, observation, and careful execution. Through it all, memories of the dog remained central. He reflected on the trust that had existed, the loyalty that had never wavered, and the love that had been unconditional. This reflection provided both sorrow and guidance, reminding him why he needed to act thoughtfully. The dog's presence had shaped his daily life, influenced his emotions, and now shaped his approach to a difficult situation. The bond they shared was a model for loyalty, discipline, and careful judgment, qualities he relied upon as he moved forward. He also thought about the people involved, the officers and the neighbors, and considered their perspectives. He understood that mistakes happen, misunderstandings occur, but that did not lessen the responsibility of those involved. He felt compassion, but not at the expense of clarity or justice. The balance of empathy and determination was delicate, yet necessary. He realized that his past had prepared him uniquely for this moment. He could manage emotions, assess situations accurately, and act with purpose even when grief threatened to dominate. The longer he reflected, the more he understood that this incident had changed him. The quiet life he had built would never feel the same, but it had also revealed an inner strength and clarity he had not fully appreciated. His ability to remain composed, to analyze every detail, and to plan actions carefully was now crucial. He recognized that grief could be transformative if approached wisely, providing focus, motivation, and insight rather than leading to reckless action. With each passing day, he continued to plan and prepare. He maintained his routines, walked the streets, observed his environment, and reflected on past experiences. The world outside continued as usual, yet for him every moment was imbued with purpose and attention. He knew that when the time came, he would act with precision, ensuring that the lessons learned from this tragedy were applied effectively. The discipline of the past had become a tool for navigating the emotional complexity of the present, and so, as the days progressed, he lived in a space of quiet preparation. He grieved deeply, but he also strategized, observed, and planned. The loss of his companion had unlocked memories of a life defined by discipline, leadership, and precision, and he allowed those qualities to guide his actions. Every step, every thought, every reflection was purposeful. The bond with his dog, once a source of simple joy, had become a source of insight, strength, and clarity. Through the pain, he discovered that even in grief, there was direction, and in the shadow of loss, there was the quiet emergence of strategy and resolve, a reminder that the skills of the past could still illuminate the path forward in a world forever changed by tragedy. After days of quiet reflection, he knew he could not let the tragedy fade into silence. The loss of his companion was a wound that needed acknowledgement and action. He understood that anger, if uncontrolled, could be destructive, but carefully directed energy could achieve purpose. He started by gathering all the details about the incident: the location, the time, the officers involved, witness statements, and photographs from neighbors who had captured moments around the park. Every piece of information mattered, and he treated it as he would any mission, analyzing, organizing, and prioritizing. He contacted the local authorities through formal channels, carefully explaining the situation, remaining calm, composed, and precise in his communication. Every word was chosen deliberately, aimed at establishing the facts without unnecessary emotion. It was not a public display, but a strategic approach. He documented each interaction, taking careful notes about responses, inconsistencies, and timelines. This methodical approach reflected his discipline, honed over years of responsibility in life and death situations. He knew that patience and precision would be more powerful than immediate emotional reaction. Evenings were spent reviewing the collected information, cross-referencing witness accounts, and identifying potential oversights in the official reports. His mind, trained for critical thinking under pressure, worked tirelessly. He thought about the ripple effects of the incident, how similar mistakes could be prevented, and what accountability truly meant in this context. While grief still lingered, it was now joined by clarity and determination. The loss of his companion had ignited a need not just for personal closure, but for a greater awareness that such tragedies should be addressed responsibly. He sought advice quietly, reaching out to individuals knowledgeable about legal procedures and animal rights. He asked discreet questions, carefully listening to guidance while maintaining control over how much information he shared. Trust was measured. He had learned long ago that information was valuable and should be used wisely. He formulated a plan step by step, combining emotional intelligence with strategic thought, ensuring that he would navigate the aftermath with dignity, integrity, and focus. The lessons of patience and preparation, essential in his past missions, were now tools for advocacy and justice. As days passed, he began to engage with the authorities more directly, presenting the documented evidence he had gathered. He remained composed even when faced with bureaucratic delays and procedural indifference. His voice was steady, his reasoning clear, and his presence commanding, not through intimidation but through a quiet authority that demanded respect. He emphasized the importance of responsibility, the need to prevent future incidents, and the emotional consequences of the tragedy. His approach was measured, persuasive, and grounded in evidence rather than emotion alone. Alongside this, he allowed himself moments of personal reflection. He visited places he and his companion had frequented, remembering their routines, the simple joys and the companionship that had been abruptly taken from him. These visits were both painful and restorative, grounding him in the human aspect of loss while reminding him of the reason for his actions. The memories were vivid, each detail a reminder of loyalty, love, and trust. They motivated him to channel grief into constructive action, reinforcing the importance of careful planning and measured response. He also considered the emotional impact on the community. Neighbors who had witnessed the incident were still processing their own reactions. He spoke with some quietly and respectfully, listening to their observations and acknowledging their perspectives. He found that many shared a sense of injustice and confusion, and by guiding these conversations, he helped create clarity and understanding. His past experience in leadership allowed him to manage these interactions with sensitivity, empathy, and strategy. He knew that influence could be exerted through calm authority as much as through direct action. Throughout this process, he remained disciplined in his daily routines. He continued to take walks, observe his surroundings, and maintain the quiet rituals that had defined his life. The absence of his companion was a constant ache, yet it also provided a steady reminder of why he was taking measured action. He integrated reflection with preparation, allowing grief to fuel purpose rather than dictate impulse. His mind, honed for critical decision-making, operated at full capacity, analyzing scenarios, assessing outcomes, and maintaining the clarity required to navigate this complex emotional landscape. He considered the broader implications of what had occurred. While the incident had happened to him personally, it represented a larger issue: the potential for misunderstanding, the consequences of misjudgment, and the importance of responsible action. He recognized that the response to this event could prevent similar tragedies for others. His approach was therefore not only personal but proactive, seeking to ensure that lessons were learned, systems improved, and accountability enforced. He felt a sense of responsibility beyond his own grief, a recognition that his actions could shape outcomes for many others. As the weeks progressed, his efforts began to bear fruit. Authorities responded more seriously to his inquiries, and he observed procedural steps being taken that reflected accountability and awareness. He continued to monitor the process meticulously, documenting interactions, noting improvements, and identifying areas still requiring attention. Every interaction was approached with calm authority, balancing assertiveness with tact. His military experience had trained him to navigate complex systems, and now those skills were applied in a civilian context with remarkable effectiveness. He also allowed himself to think about healing, about rebuilding a sense of normalcy. He recognized that while action was necessary, personal restoration was equally important. He spent time reflecting on the bond he had shared with his companion, understanding that love and loyalty were enduring even when physical presence was lost. This reflection provided both solace and guidance, reinforcing the values that had always shaped his life: patience, empathy, responsibility, and strategic thinking. Grief became a teacher as well as a motivator. Neighbors and friends began to notice a subtle change. While he remained reserved, there was a quiet strength, an air of purpose that had deepened. He interacted politely, maintained routines, and shared memories of his companion with a gentle human warmth. His presence conveyed resilience, not through grand gestures but through consistent, thoughtful action. The tragedy had transformed him in a way that was both visible and subtle, a man still grieving, yet channeling that grief into purposeful effort and reflection. He occasionally walked near the park where the incident had occurred, observing the area, the patterns of movement, and the interactions of those around him. It was both a personal reflection and a continuation of careful observation, a reminder of lessons learned and a measure of control regained. The place that had once been a site of joy and companionship was now also a reminder of loss, responsibility, and the importance of vigilance. He navigated these visits with care, allowing memories and awareness to coexist, balancing emotion with clarity. At home, he maintained meticulous records, planning each step of engagement with authorities and community leaders. He ensured that communication was clear, evidence well documented, and actions purposeful. The process required patience and precision, qualities he had developed over years of challenging circumstances. He recognized that influence and accountability often depended not on force but on clarity, consistency, and strategic presence. This realization guided every interaction, every decision, and every step forward. Even as he worked through these challenges, he maintained moments of quiet remembrance. He looked at photographs, revisited familiar places, and recalled the small joys of companionship. These reflections were bittersweet, but they reinforced the values that guided him: loyalty, love, responsibility, and care. Grief was a constant companion, but it was tempered by purpose and clarity. He understood that honoring the memory of his companion required thoughtful action as much as quiet reflection. The efforts he made were not without difficulty. Bureaucratic delays, procedural oversights, and moments of frustration tested his patience. Yet he remained composed, drawing on years of experience managing high-pressure situations. He navigated these challenges with calm authority, understanding that perseverance, attention to detail, and clarity of purpose were more powerful than rash action. Each obstacle became an opportunity to demonstrate discipline and resolve, qualities that had defined his life both in past missions and in the present struggle. He also reflected on the personal lessons of the tragedy. The incident highlighted the fragility of life, the importance of vigilance, and the need to act thoughtfully in moments of crisis. It reinforced the value of loyalty, trust, and empathy. These lessons, though learned in sorrow, became guiding principles for his approach to both life and justice. He recognized that true strength was not only in skill or training, but in the ability to channel emotion, maintain control, and act with purpose. In his quiet moments, he imagined conversations with his companion, recalling the warmth, trust, and simple joys they had shared. These imagined moments were not escape but reflection, a way to connect with the bond that had been so suddenly broken. They reminded him of the meaning of loyalty, the depth of care, and the importance of acting responsibly. The memories served as a compass, guiding his actions with integrity and clarity. As he continued to engage with authorities, gather evidence, and advocate for accountability, he found a sense of resolution growing slowly within him. The process was not immediate, nor was it complete, but each step forward reinforced his confidence and determination. He balanced grief with purpose, emotion with strategy, and remembrance with action. The tragedy had shaken him, yet it had also awakened a focused, disciplined response that honored both the past and the present. His efforts extended beyond personal action. He began conversations with community members, sharing insights about the importance of understanding, communication, and awareness. These discussions were gentle but purposeful, designed to prevent future misunderstandings and to promote responsibility and empathy. He used his experience and calm authority to influence perspectives subtly but effectively, helping others navigate the complexities of community life and responsibility. Through it all, he remained connected to the values that had always defined him: integrity, loyalty, discipline, and empathy. The loss of his companion had been profound, yet it also revealed the depth of his character, the capacity for thoughtful action, and the strength to transform grief into constructive effort. Each day he worked methodically, balanced reflection with planning, and allowed both sorrow and purpose to coexist in harmony. As the weeks turned into months, small progress became evident. Authorities responded, procedures were reviewed, and the incident became a case study in careful documentation, accountability, and awareness. His persistent, disciplined approach ensured that the tragedy would not be forgotten and that lessons would be applied for the future. Through patient effort, he transformed personal loss into meaningful change, demonstrating that even in grief, action guided by clarity and purpose could lead to resolution. And so, he continued. Each day brought reflection, preparation, and careful action. The memory of his companion remained a source of strength, motivation, and insight. Grief was acknowledged, yet it did not dominate. Purpose guided his steps, informed his decisions, and shaped his interactions. In this balance of sorrow and action, he found a path forward, a way to honor the lost, advocate for responsibility, and demonstrate the enduring strength of a disciplined, compassionate, and determined heart.